got a bunch that's a little bit different.
Hey everybody, on this episode of Unbeatable, I get a chance to meet, for the first time ever, Mike Norris. This guy has been in the center of movements. He's been in the middle of storms. He's got a story about a firestorm, about a financial storm, about some of the challenges of family. Basically, there is something from Mike's story that we can all learn about on this episode of Unbeatable. And by the way, before we get into this episode, I just want to remind you, I'm going with some friends and I want you to come no matter where you live on this unbeatable Holy Land adventure. It's going to be on March 17th through the 27th, and here's some more information about it. Hey, before we get into the interview for this episode, I want to invite you to go with me on the trip of a lifetime, and that is not an exaggeration. I've spent more than the last year building a tour of the Holy Land that never existed before. This is what we're calling the Unbeatable Adventure, where we're going to rappel, we're going to climb cliffs, we're going to ride mountain bikes through the countryside, we're going to swim in the Dead Sea, we're going to climb trails, we're going to spend nights under the stars and spend days in luxury hotel rooms. We'll be in fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee. This is basically everything that you could want to do with action and adventure in Israel, plus all of the world's great historical sites there. And the dates for this trip are March 17th through the 27th. I want to invite you to come along. We built this trip so no matter where you live in the world, all you need to do is buy plane tickets and show up in Israel on day one. And from there, we pay for and we take care of everything. Hey, if this epic tour sounds like something you're interested in, why don't you go over to Signature Tours and search for the Unbeatable Holy Land Adventure with Jeff Struker. Starts March 17th and it runs until the 27th. I would love to see you there with me. Now let's get into this interview with my guest, Mike Norris, on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Mike, thanks for joining me on this episode of Unbeatable.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Our team has been doing a little cyber stalking of you, and I've learned a little bit about you just from the internet. And you know the internet, who knows if what they said is true. So I'm looking forward to getting to know you and finding out if what the internet says about you is true.
Okay, we'll see what happens here.
Yeah. Listen, I was on an airplane a couple of months back, and I had been wanting to watch the movie Jesus Movement. So I'm on an airplane, I'm flying on a long flight, and sure, I'm 15 minutes into this movie and I'm absolutely hooked. And then it takes me all the way to the last scene of the movie before I realize I thought this whole movie was about Kelsey Grammer's character and about the whole Calvary Chapel movement. But actually, it appears that this movie was all about Greg Laurie and about his start in ministry. I don't want to ruin it for anybody who's watching this episode or listening to this episode of Unbeatable who hasn't seen Jesus Movement. Great movie. Go watch it. Even if you don't know the history of what went on there, I still think it's absolutely an awesome movie. Have you seen the movie, Mike?
I have seen the movie, and we've shown it actually to several sets of friends now too. So
Nice.
that actually is our story.
That's where I was going with this next. Would you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down or what?
Oh, I would definitely give it a thumbs up. So
all right. Spoiler alert for the entire audience. You were kind of connected with Harvest Church and with Greg Laurie for a long time. Man, I've been dying to find out this part of your past. So let's just talk about your time with Greg Laurie and Harvest Church that, the movie Jesus Movement describes. Can you go back in time a little bit and let's talk about that?
Sure. I had been a lifelong Catholic kind of retired after 20 years, but I had been away from church for about 4 years, and my brother kept trying to get me to go to church, and he kept telling me about this church that he was going to, and I couldn't believe there was a church that was that exciting and that
Yeah.
great. But
Let me jump in. Your brothers, the language that your brothers use, and you're saying, no, wait, that can't be church, right? Church is not supposed to be exciting.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly my point. Plus, who listens to their little brother, really?
Right.
So
Exactly.
you
Especially
know,
he's your little brother. Yeah. What does he know?
yeah, exactly. So, but I actually did end up going to church with him and his wife, and a little bit because I was interested in his sister-in-law. So,
Well, there you go.
you know, but actually, yes, that night um, was the second time that my wife had walked down the aisle with me. We were paired up during the wedding, and then so after listening to Steve Camp and listening to Greg, which I don't remember a word that he said, I just knew that I needed Jesus, and so he walked down the aisle with me that night too, and so that was way back in 1979, and Harvest was probably, well, actually, we were Calvary Chapel Riverside back then, and um, we were probably about 600 strong. We were in the very church that Chuck handed the keys to Greg to, and it was interesting because we had just graded off the pad for the big church when we started going there, and so we actually got to watch Harvest grow from about 600 people to about 16,000 by the time we left.
Holy smokes. Wait a second. You got to do these numbers again for people that are driving and didn't catch that part of it. When you showed up, 1970s, late 1970s, Harvest Christian Fellowship was about 600 people. And when you left there, how many years later?
We left there, I believe, 16 years later, maybe 17, and we had an attendance at that point of about 16,000 people.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
For anybody who's listening right now who didn't see the movie Jesus Movement, and I suspect that's most of the people that are not listening from the United States and even a lot of the US audience, you got a chance to basically get a front row seat to most of what the movie Jesus Movement shows. What kind of describe how your role adjusted, how your role changed as the church grew during those first few years?
Well, it was interesting because the first few years, of course, you're just learning and learning and learning. And the way Harvest and the rest of Calvary Chapels teach and do service is we go chapter by chapter, verse by verse, line by line, with expository teaching. And so there were times it seemed like we were drinking, getting a drink through a
From a
fire
fire
hose,
hose,
so to
right?
speak.
Yeah, I know what that
And
feels like.
yeah, so between, Sundays and Wednesdays, it was a lot of learning. But at the same time, it was participating. They never advocating, being what they called a pew potato. They wanted input and output. So, it became doing a lot of lay ministry around the church. And, from ushering and doing the parking lot ministry and becoming a new convert counselor and then becoming a lay counselor and an elder there. It was just, continually, like I said, continuous learning, continually accepting your new responsibilities.
Yeah. When I first saw the title to the movie and kind of the picture behind it, I recognized the phrase Jesus movement because of what I studied. Now, for the listeners out there, I'm an older guy. I'm a pretty old guy, but this is a little bit before my time. There was a phenomenon in the United States, and it actually started spreading around the world in the later half of the 1970s, called the Jesus movement. And that Jesus movement, which is what the film is named, was hippies, literally, the tie-dyed and bell-bottom jeans and long hair that were just radically being changed, and they would kind of continue to look like hippies, but they were now hippies for Jesus. And it sounds like you were actually right in the middle of the whole Jesus movement. And I'm not talking just Greg Laurie and Harvest Christian Fellowship Church, but I'm talking about that whole phenomenon of people coming to their lives being radically changed in the late 1970s. When was it that your brother invited you to church? When was it that your life really turned around?
He probably started asking me to go about 1978. And then in March of 79, um, I can't ever remember the specific date, but my wife has it. But March of 79 is actually when I accepted the Lord. Yeah,
All right. And I
so,
didn't miss this phrase. You said it earlier, but I want to go back to it now. You said that your wife walked down the aisle with you. Is that what happened on that day that Jesus radically changed you?
yeah, we had the four of us, my brother, his wife, my future wife, that I didn't know that yet, but, and I went to the evening service. And as typical, we had worship. We had a musician there which was Steve Camp that night, and then Greg went ahead and gave his evangelistic Sunday night sermon. So, and he always did an altar call Sunday night. So I just, the Lord, when the Lord wanted me, it was really interesting because it wasn't only my brother that was witnessing to me, but it was people that we were driving to the hospital on the back of the ambulance. They would just start talking to
All
me about
right.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Or,
All right.
I had a guy in school that was like, he was a deputy sheriff, and so of course the paramedic and the deputy sheriff always hook up, and so he was talking to me about Jesus, and it's just the Lord just kept sending me people for a period of about 2 years, and I was like, well, I'm a Catholic, and I kept blowing it off towards that direction, but then he just kept creating circumstances in my life to where I knew Catholicism wasn't the answer, or any religion wasn't the answer. It was the relationship.
Yeah.
So,
I'm glad you pointed this out. We're not going to knock people for their denomination. We're not going to knock religious systems in this episode. But I will say that lots of people, they inherited mom and dad's faith, and they basically bought into a religious system and not necessarily a relationship with God. And what you found that Sunday night at Harvest was no longer religion, a genuine relationship with the God who created you. Um, I already know a little bit about this answer, but I want you to go ahead and answer it to the audience. Why are you out in California in the first place? What are you doing out there when you finally get connected to this church?
well, we grew up in an Air Force family. So I joke around that I put my 20 years in the Air Force too, but as a dependent. And
All right.
as such, we traveled all over the United States. I think we did 5 bases while I was still in the family in the United States, and we had gone to Spain and had done a tour in Spain, and then we came back
Oh, nice.
to California. And at first, we came back to Central California, and then to March Air Force Base down in Southern California. And so when um, my parents got divorced about the time I was 14 or 15, somewhere in there. And because I was in high school, I stayed with my mom because it was the first time I'd been in a
Sure.
school for more than 2 years in a row. And I didn't want to give that up at that point.
Yeah.
So
Well, listen, on this podcast, we always thank veterans for their service, but we take it a step further and we always thank military families because of the great sacrifices that you made so that your parents could serve in the Air Force. So thank you, Mike, for the sacrifices you made. And now the guests, or now the audience that's listening, gets a chance to hear about those sacrifices, moving every couple of years and the challenges. But you went through more than just typical military brat, or Air Force brat, military child problems when your parents, problems at home when you were growing up. Mom and dad, or dad, had some issues more than just what the Air Force was bringing into the family. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like growing up at home?
Yeah, actually, it wasn't just my dad. There was a lot of verbal and physical mutual combat between mom and dad. There was more than enough alcohol flowing half the time, and the smoking, the cursing, the just general disarray of the house. And it was kind of interesting because I thought maybe it was just my perception, but after we all grew up, and my brothers and I have talked about this a dozen times at least, they perceived the same thing. But it actually kind of settled down a little bit after they split. But being the oldest, I kind of had to take on some of the rage, from my mom that my dad was receiving. So made me very insecure, made me very withdrawn. Um, I, like you, spent my time running. I eventually, in high school, I was a sub 5 minute miler, and
Nice. Impressive.
I
Yeah.
because I would just get out and run, and so I was really good about running away from problems, not
Yeah.
very good about
Yeah. You
addressing
can
them.
actually physically run until you're exhausted. Your problems are still at home, but now I'm so exhausted that I'm not stressed out about them anymore, right?
Exactly. So, but
Um,
yeah, so
so
that
you just mentioned something, and I want to make sure that nobody missed this. You're the oldest child. Mom and dad, if I heard you correctly, are pretty violent with each other, both with their words, but also physically. And because you're the oldest child, and in every family that I know where there's issues, the oldest child always has the brunt of them. Like all of the children experience them, but usually the oldest child has it the worst. So you said dad was angry, dad was combative with mom, and as a result, mom, did I hear you correctly, turned around and took that out on you?
um, not while they were together, but subsequent to that, everything in life that went wrong was my fault, or
Yeah.
I just became. She had just as angry of a personality as he did, and
Yeah.
it was probably not a good match from the beginning, but yeah, neither one of them would ever give in or give up, and so
Certainly everybody that's listening knows a friend or two that has a marriage like you're describing. Like the husband is volatile, the wife is volatile, and then when they start to go at it, now it's like two sticks of dynamite exploding. It's bad enough when there's one stick of dynamite going off in the relationship. When there's two, it's twice as bad.
right.
um, and most kids that grow up in an environment like that cannot wait to get away from home, cannot wait to find a job, move out, and basically leave that drama behind them. What was it that got you out of the home, and what is it that you started doing to for a career after leaving school?
I I did some odd jobs, including working in a hospital emergency room, and I got to see in the paramedics bringing people in, and I thought, well, I'd like to become a paramedic, so I went to emergency medical technician school, and then went to paramedic school and started working there. But the call to nursing was still kind of there, so I went to nursing school and eventually became an RN and worked in the ER and the ICUs and surgery for a little bit. But I hated being inside. I wanted to go back out in the field. So I went to the fire department after that. In 1984, I finally got a full-time fire job as a firefighter paramedic, and that started off on a 34-year career after that. So
That's what we're going to talk about next. But now you've just explained a comment a few minutes ago. You said, hey, even when I was in the back of an ambulance heading to the hospital, and immediately I thought, and most people probably did, were you on your deathbed when you were heading to the hospital? But you were
yeah,
actually working in the back of the ambulance, taking somebody to the hospital when friends started talking to you about what they believe and asking you questions because you were a paramedic on an ambulance.
right. It is pretty funny too because a lot of people go, "Oh, you're working on an ambulance; it must give you a lot of time to witness to somebody." And yet, you try to explain to them that sometimes I'm really in the middle of saving their
Yeah.
lives, and
Doesn't
they're in
always
no
go that way,
condition to,
right?
yeah, they're in no condition to understand what you're telling them, and I mean, you're always praying in the back of your
Yeah.
mind, but you're saying, "Well, I'm saving their life, so maybe somebody else can witness to them."
Right.
So,
On an ambulance in Southern California, you had to have seen some intense stuff. I mean, listen, ambulances get a chance to be right in the thick of life and death. Literally, that's why you're on an ambulance. Anywhere in America, rural town or small towns, in rural parts of America, just like the big cities. But man, this is the late 1970s, early 1980s in Southern California, where there are riots. Literally, people burn buildings to the ground because of what was going on in that part of California. So I don't know if you remember any of those exceptionally, gruesome or not gruesome. We're not trying to gross people out, but exceptionally challenging, situations that you had to deal with when you're on the back of the ambulance.
yeah, in parts of California, like the rest of the nation, there's paramedics on the ambulances too, so they're not just in the fire department. But we did see the worst of life. We there's things burned in my brain that you know I can't really even describe because it would just be too gross to be on the show.
Yeah, please
But
don't gross people out right now because there's some mom driving right now listening to this podcast, and I don't want her to start throwing up while she's driving down the road.
exactly. And I don't want to spread that trauma because some people just listening to it
Yeah,
incur that trauma. So,
yeah.
I always tell people I'm not normal, and many of us aren't.
All right. You know what? I'm not normal either. So now we got, now it's okay that you're not normal, nor am I.
I can understand why you're not. I mean,
Yeah. I ask you about the ambulance on purpose because I want people to recognize there's a lot of people behind the scenes that when you and I pick up our cell phone and we're in the middle of life's worst moments, and you just use that language like you got a chance to see the darkest or the ugliest or the worst parts of life. When you and I pick up the cell phone and dial those three numbers, 911, there are people that rush into our mess and come in the middle of this gruesome scene or this terrible situation. And man, I want to thank you for being a military family, but I also want to thank you for being a first responder because I've been around the world to enough places to know there are lots of places in the world where if you're hurt or you're in trouble, there's no one you can call for help. And it's not lost on me the fact that we live in a country where if you dial the numbers 911, there's a huge resource and a lot of people that are going to go screaming with the lights flashing and the at full speed into your mess to try to get to you and help you. And man, what an incredible country we live in, that there's guys and gals like you, Mike, in first responders and law enforcement that are there to help when we're in a need.
thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. And I appreciate your service too. Coming,
Well, thanks.
I
So
mean,
you go from the ambulance to the police force. Let's just get to the firestorm. There's a part of your story that I want people to really hear, and I want them to hear, the full story. So, can you talk about what you experienced back in 1994?
right. I was working for the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, which is a state fire department there, and working in Riverside County, which is down in the southern section of California, it also served as the county fire department there. So it's a rather large fire department with about 96 stations and a couple of thousand people in it. And
Wow.
I was,
96 fire stations in that
yes,
county. Wow.
yeah, and that's just the county fire department. It doesn't count all the other cities, but um, I was stationed up on what we called the Mountain Plateau. We've got huge mountains in Southern California. The mountain that we lived on actually was almost 11,000 feet in altitude, and where I worked was sitting about 4,400 feet. It was nice apple orchards, but just like everywhere else in California, just a ton of brush. It was a very rural area, and houses interspersed with all that. And then um, on June 26th of 1994, I was a fire captain working on a brush engine, and not too far from the San Diego County line. Yeah, and we had a vehicle fire that got started, and as many vehicle fires happen or
Yeah.
house fires happen up there, they end up into the brush.
Yeah. Now I want to pause for just a second, Mike.
Okay,
There are listeners right now that are listening from Sweden, and there are people tuned in
right.
Australia and in the Philippines, and none of them are really familiar with the terrain in Southern California. You
Hmm.
are, I am, but almost everybody in the world has seen these news reports about thousands of acres on fire, and it's sweeping across California, at full speed, and many houses that are on fire. And what I want people to hear from you right now is, why do you keep seeing these? Why does people all over the world see news reports about these wildfires in California? And you and I know there's some perfect conditions. When these conditions line up and a fire gets started, man, it is going to be very, very bad for a lot of people, because of just the way that that part of California is. So you've just started describing that. Can you go into a little bit more detail for those listeners around the world that don't understand California, but they've seen the pictures on their news channels about wildfires in Southern California?
Sure. The typical fuels in California, there's a lot of brush out there. We do have a lot of trees running too, but they tend to be chronically dehydrated.
Yeah, it's dry
We
out there,
don't.
like almost desert dry.
Right, and we lived in we lived and worked in um, a semi-arid place that that by usually by July or August, the fuels were just, they would have no live fuel moisture to them. There was nothing coming up through the roots, and so you combine that with triple digit heat and single digit humidity and double digit wind, and you just got a recipe for fires.
Yeah, I wanted you to do that math formula one more time, because just imagine that where you live, everything is dry to the bone. I mean, you just described it, dry all the way to the roots, triple digit heat, single digit humidity, which means there's no moisture in the air if the fire starts, and double digit wind. You put those three components together in a math formula, and what you're going to get if a vehicle catches on fire on the side of the road is a wildfire that is going to spread at an uncontrollable rate, which is what happened in June of 94, right? You're a fire captain when a vehicle catches on fire near the side of the road, and boom, it's off. And
Right.
the fire's off, off to the races.
So the second day, the fire just ripped the whole first day, and the second day we started losing homes, and so we spent the majority of the day trying to save homes, and it just was getting to be rather futile. It was getting to be rather frustrating. I think we lost close to 60 or 70 homes, if I remember correctly. A lot of outbuildings, and so while I was busy doing structure protection, the bosses were formulating a plan to burn out a lot of the fuel so that the fire would stop.
Yeah, just take away the source of the fire by burning it out before the major flames get there. Is that what you're describing?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the plan was for all night long for the bulldozers to come in and cut two lines. Both of them were reinforcing old truck trails or old Jeep trails, but to widen those out, one on the south flank of the fire, one on the west flank of the fire, and then we would burn simultaneously each flank and meet together in the corner. And it was a huge amount of area. It was probably 4.5 or 5 square miles that we were just
Wow.
going to burn
Yeah.
out. And
Wow.
it was all vegetation. There were no houses in there. So we knew that, we wouldn't be putting any more assets at risk other than the wildland. And so the next morning we were going to get started. We started running into logistical problems. Some of the equipment didn't show up. Some of the staffing didn't show up. We were getting behind time, and so I was assigned to the west flank, and we were actually gonna start firing from the north corner of the fire down to the south corner of the fire. We were gonna go north to south. The other guys were gonna go east to west, and we were supposed to be in that corner, like I said. But because we got behind time on my flank, we got started late and got started way short on resources too. But they determined, hey, we're going to do it. The guys on the south flank were already burning, and we couldn't lose it because we weren't going to finish up that west flank. And we had another community on the west of us that we needed to protect as well. So, but we were doing fine. I had two firefighters on the engine, and myself and another captain working the flank. And I need to explain something about the brush engines in California back then. Uh, Basically, they were smaller engines. The firefighters actually sat in the back, the very back of the engine, and you accessed it from the back. There were two seats in the back, and they faced each other. So the firefighters would ride sideways and face each other, and we had built-in fire shelters so that they could pull them over in case something went bad. And the reason I'm saying that is they come into play real quick here. But and so we're just cruising down. I'm thinking, man, this is a great day. The wind's at our back a little bit, and I was lighting along the dirt road, and it was taken up, and my friend was following up with a flare gun, my captain buddy, and our fire was taken up great. And the main body of fire is like 2 miles away from us. And so we thought, this is doing good. We're nice and safe. And so we're cruising down the road there, and all of a sudden, I just felt like something ain't quite right. In California we call it AQR, but we just
AQR. I love
yeah.
it. Ain't quite
So
right. All of us know what that feels like.
yeah, so I'm sure it was the Holy Spirit telling me something,
Uh-huh.
but I stopped firing for a second. I looked up the road a little bit, and the other captain's looking at me same time, and so I got on my handy talkie and I said, something's AQR here. I'm not quite sure what it is. And he comes back and he says, I don't like it. And we had the engine in between the two of us. We were about 50 yards apart, and so we just went running back towards the engine. And the two firefighters were on the back of the engine, and we told them, you know what, something's going wrong here. And we started having spot fires all over the place, half a mile out in front of the main body of fire. They were starting out at 2 to 3 to 4 acres, and this place is just starting to auto ignite all over the place. And we no sooner told the two firefighters on the back, no matter what happens, you stay on this engine, then the wind hit us face on. And um, it hit hard and fast. One of the firefighters, a gal named Terry, she went to deploy the fire shelter off the engine, and it picked her up like a drag chute off of an F4 or B-52 or something. It almost pulled her out of the engine. The other firefighter wrapped around her, and they wrapped themselves up like a burrito in this thing and fell down between the two seats. And now stuff's hitting the engine hard. And not that there's a comparison here, but the sound sounded just like the movie in Black Hawk Down when you guys had
Yeah.
stuff hitting you,
Yeah.
on the Humvees. It sounded just like that. And so um, this wind is just picking everything up. And it's getting
So
hard to see. It's getting hard to breathe.
where are you at this point? Where are you and the other captain right now? The two firefighters are still on the engine. Where are you and the
Right.
other captain?
I lost track of Kev. I
The other captain.
completely. I was standing behind the engine, and I thought I got to get these two firefighters. They're young kids. They're
Yeah,
18, 19
sure.
years old. I thought I got to get them into the cab because the cab was
Uh-huh.
protective, and so I'm pulling on their feet while they're down between the seats, and one of them kicked me in the finger, and it jammed my finger. And you know how life stops
And
when you
yes,
jam a
and that just
finger?
made you mad, right? Like I've got a fire around me that's about to consume us and we're all going to die, but I'm mad because you just jammed my finger.
Yeah, so I wasn't really mad, but I was just thinking, man,
I
so
know
holding my
exactly what that
finger.
feels like. I'm in the middle of a firefight. Everything in the world is exploding around me, and I just jam my finger, and all I can think about is my finger right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then my helmet blows off, blew my helmet into oblivion. I never did find that helmet again. But then I
The
get hit in the
fire,
head with,
if I want to make sure I heard this correctly, the
yeah,
fire ripped your helmet off of your head.
the winds did.
The winds did.
The
Wow.
winds in front of the fire. And so um, I was really getting pelted with rocks. It felt like I was getting hit with baseballs and golf balls and everything else. And then one of them hit me in the head. And now I'm on all fours behind the engine, and I don't know which bodily function I'm going to lose control of first, but it was a real fight just not to go
Yeah.
unconscious.
Yeah.
I could see my field of vision narrowing in and
Yeah.
stuff, and
Everything starts to get dark around you, right?
right, and I
Yeah.
just said, you know what, I am not dying on this stupid dirt road on the county line out here. I just had to kind of get really determined about it. And again, I sensed some strength that wasn't coming from me on this,
Uh huh.
and and I was really at peace about everything. I was thinking fast, I was thinking clearly, but God definitely had a role in where we were going with this. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go crawl behind the tire on the leeward side of the engine so that I can at least get out of this mess. So I did that, and I put my brains back in my head, got recovered a little bit, but then the engine started rocking and it started moving on the dirt road. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to get us out of here.
Yeah.
So, um, I,
I sorry to interrupt. I want to
no,
make
that's
sure
all
for the
right.
listeners they're hearing what's going on. I've been around massive military training bases that have lots of brush, and in order
Right.
to keep that brush under control, but also more importantly to keep a fire from spreading across an entire state, the military will do what you're describing. They will do a controlled wildfire. They will take a huge section of land. They will start a fire on the perimeter of that entire section of land, and the fire starts really small on the perimeter by the road, and then it just moves quickly to the inside, and theoretically it burns itself out when it gets to the center of that plot of land. I've been around that a lot, so I've had a chance to see the pressure and the wind and kind of the force that a fire can create, and it will pick up vehicles off the ground. That's how much force a fire can create. It will create winds and vortexes like a tornado, for the listener. And when you say rocks are pelting you, when you say that the vehicle is rocking, I want them to understand that's all being created by the force of the fire around you. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And it was so loud. It was literally like standing behind a KC-10 or something when it was, getting ready
Yeah.
to taxi
Standing
and
behind a
winding up.
jet engine that's on
Yes,
full throttle, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so um, the fortunate thing is we had burned out enough around us that we didn't get any direct flame impingement.
Uh huh.
But um, So we were spared that, but we were still taking everything the fire could throw at us. And so I thought, I got to get us out of here. That's the only answer. So I went over to the cab, and I had a hard time getting the door open, partially because the international trucks, you had to hold the handle up like this to get it out. But I'm pulling on it and pulling on it, and I thought, what idiot locked the door? And I'm on the driver's side, I'm on the leeward side. But I looked down and the pin was still up. And I thought, what's going on? But what I didn't know is we were overpressuring, underpressuring to this point that wouldn't let the doors open. And that's when I found out where Kevin was at, because he opened up the door. Somehow he got the door on the windward side open and then overpressured the cab, and the
Yeah.
door smacks me in the face and gives
Oh,
me a
no.
bloody nose.
Oh, man.
And now
Just
I'm
got a
sitting back down
big
on the
finger
ground
knocked
again.
on the head with a rock, busted
Oh,
face up from the door. Man, you're a mess right now.
yeah, and it got to the point that I was going to start crying, so I started laughing. You just do that. But
What
I
else can you
finally
do?
got into the cab, and I pushed in the spring brake, and I put it down into drive, and I'm ready to go. And Kevin's like, "Stop, stop, stop!" And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Anywhere but here." And so he goes, "Look," and I looked outside, and it's pitch black at this point, Jeff. You can't see anything but a bazillion embers going through the space in front of us, and so um, I thought, well, I backed the engine up into the cut bank that we were sitting against to try to protect the firefighters on the back a little more, which made the cab the target of everything that was coming at us. And so I went ahead, parked it again, and Kevin and I ended up on the floor. And so, the window gets cracked, the mirror gets broken, the light bar takes a shot, and again, the whole engine's just rocking and stuff like this. And finally, all of a sudden, as fast as it started, it was over with. And Kevin and I kind of looked at each other, and I pulled the engine back out onto the road a little bit, and we got out. And I was told at that point, because I don't know, I couldn't see it all, but there was 800 acres on the other side of the road on fire now. And so, of course, everything that we had set in place
Yeah.
was now
Yeah. Now, all of the work that you did is for nothing.
blown up. And so we went to the back of the fire engine, and there literally was probably a foot or a foot and a half of debris and dirt and ash and everything else on
Wow.
top of the two firefighters back there. And so, we're digging them out, and all of a sudden, everybody kind of realized that we're gone. They thought that, I had so many comments that said, "We thought you guys were dead." And everybody's screaming for us on the radio, and at least probably a dozen different units were calling us. And I couldn't even answer because they just kept, how the radio
Yeah, I know.
traffic just,
Sure, I know how it goes. Yep.
they're walking on each other, and I can't get a word in edgewise. And so finally we just kept digging the two of them out, and we rinsed them off because they had inhaled half of the world.
Oh man.
And, they were coughing and sputtering, and their legs had burns on them. And so we were trying to take care of those guys. And finally, everybody shut up enough to where I could break in and say, "Hey, you know what? We're here. We got minor injuries, but no need for a panic anymore because it's over with." And then I heard somebody told me that there were two other captains that were further down the road on foot. And so
Oh
I
my
said, "Well, I'll
goodness.
go check them
Yeah.
out. I'll go check them out." And I'm running down the road looking for these guys, and I'm thinking, why am I running? I don't want to find two dead people out here. And it turns out that they had hidden behind a rock outcropping and had survived it. But at this place, one of my partners that I'd grown up in the fire service with was coming up the road in a pickup truck. He's crying, and gave me a huge hug and stuff like that. And we finally got back to the landing zone for the helicopters where the ambulance was at and stuff like that. And we turned the two firefighters over to the medics over there, and then Kevin and I went back to fire camp after that with a very messed up engine, and both of us with our brains kind of scrambled,
Yeah.
but okay.
Well, I know all of the listeners are dying to find this out. So all four of you guys survived, and there were some burns and some minor injuries, but all four of you survived without any major, trauma, major injuries during this
Right.
firestorm.
I had about 35 holes in my Nomex jacket where the
Wow.
embers had burned through, and there were
Nomex,
a
by the
couple.
way, for the listener, is a fire resistant material. So this is the firefighter's jacket that has 35 holes in it.
Yeah, and Nomex burns as long as there's flame on it, but once the
Yeah.
flame goes out, it quits burning. But I had ember marks all over it. It had gotten sliced a couple of times, and I probably had a dozen or so small burns on each arm. I'd had some on my face. I took an ember in the eye, that
Oh, man.
and that was probably my biggest problem. But um,
Where's that
you know,
jacket right now? It needs to be hanging up in a museum somewhere so that people can see what you guys did out there.
the funny thing is the investigators took it, and I never saw it again.
They probably sent it back to the company and said, "Hey, this stuff that you guys made, look at this. It no question saved your life many times over."
Right. Well, the funny thing is this the service center, which gives us all of our equipment, that's where our supplies are at, wanted that shirt back because I had gotten another shirt out, obviously, and they wanted the exchange, and I'm like, I don't even know where it's at.
Yeah, right.
So, but they
Hey, I want to skip forward in your story just a little bit because there's another
okay,
part of your story that I want people to hear. So you spent a long time with the fire department. If I heard the
yes,
number correctly, 34 years. Is that what you said?
yeah.
And then eventually you retire. But it doesn't actually go that well. Can you describe, forced retirement and leaving California Fire, and the financial crisis that you incurred as a result of it?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because when the kids became teenagers, I left Cal Fire. Number one, because the work weeks were just really long, and like the military, if they needed us on a
Yeah,
fire, you just
you
got the
got to go,
orders to
right?
go, and you
Doesn't
got to
matter if
go.
it's a special occasion, you got to leave. Yep.
Yep. And so, having three boys of our own, being in their teens, their brains don't work, it's all cortisol and testosterone, and they're giving mom a hard time, and so I decided to go to a smaller department, um, and I was the fire chief there, so things were working out pretty good. But for the first year, but after that, things kind of went downhill, and I had another department that was headhunting me. So I went to the second department, got a huge raise, which was great for my retirement, and worked there for about 2.5 years. And then 6:30 in the morning, the city manager walked in with, "Here's your papers. We'll see you later."
Wow,
And
that much notice. Hey, here's
yeah,
your walk-in papers. 34 years of service. See ya.
yeah, exactly. And so um, that that became a huge stressor.
Yeah.
Is
What you're describing, Mike, right now is most families, waking nightmare that they'll walk into the office tomorrow and, their entire livelihood is gone in an instant because somebody says, thanks for everything, but I'll see you later.
yeah, it was yeah, and so like one of your other guests said, it doesn't matter at that point really how Christian you are. Your identity is so much wrapped up in what your employment is, and especially if you're in the military or public
So
safety,
true.
to where
So true. Yes.
it's not a job, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm at home, and I I had stopped off at the helicopter company and said, "Hey, I need a job back," and they didn't have a slot, but they were going to work on it. Stopped off at the college so I could become an instructor there, but it was April and I had to wait till September till the next class started, and so there was a little bit of a nice vacation there, but somebody as hyper as I am doesn't do well just sitting around. But it did put me through some changes, and um, even though there was stuff to do at church and things like that, you still struggled with the identity part of it. And we it was interesting as we started looking to get out of state because we were kind of at the point of the spear of the California exodus. Um, we had an opportunity in South Dakota that did not go well, and but the kids couldn't get jobs. Our sons couldn't get jobs. They all went into public safety, but their educations were done. They had their academies. Nobody was hiring. They were laying off at the top and not backfilling from the bottom at the time. So our middle son ended up getting a job with Montgomery, Alabama Fire Rescue. And so our second son got a job with Montgomery PD. Our third son was in Israel at the time, earning his master's. And he says, "I'm not going back. I'm going to Alabama with the guys." So Marie and I decided that we'll pick up and head that direction since we already had one grandchild and more on the way. That would be the best place for us. And it kind of extended, I think, the transition a little bit to normalcy or to the new normal anyway, because now we're truly in a foreign place. I mean, it was like we almost needed our passports to get stamped here because the culture's so different, and the language is different, and the mindset is different, and so but it took us about 5 years to find a church that we were really grounded with
Yeah.
and accepted us, and after that, after I got into that church, then things just started racing, and got back into ministry, and things are rocking now. Things are
All
doing
right.
really well
Yeah.
now. So
You're not the first person that described moving halfway across the United States to a different part of the United States is very much like moving to a different culture, country. You might as well stamp my passport because even the way that they talk is so different that we're having a hard time, understanding. Yeah, you're not the first person that I've heard say that. There was, look, being uh being let go from the fire department, California Fire, the way that you were let go, it obviously impacted your finances. So how did you and your family navigate through that as well?
we um we were blessed in the fact that we had about half of my salary to live on. Um, I
Let me make sure
retired
I
at
heard this
70.
correctly. Half of what a normal retirement from California Fire would be, is that what you have
No,
or
half of
had?
my salary
Okay.
when I was working full
Half of what
time.
you were making before they let you go.
Right.
Got it.
And so um, I lost about 25% of my pay from overtime because we always had overtime.
Uh-huh.
And then I retired at 75%, so we lost 25% off the top. So it ended up about half of what we were used to. Fortunately, um, we had some savings, uh, and we were able to live off of that a little bit. We had about 7 years left to pay on the house, and I actually planned on my last paycheck paying the house off on the mortgage and then retiring. And of course, that went down the drain. We had to go back to a 30-year loan so that we could
Oh
afford the house
man.
payment.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're still working on that one. So we've been in this house for 8 years now,
Yeah.
but um, so that whole idea of not having a mortgage when you're retired just went down the drain.
Yeah.
But we, my wife has always been so good with the finances, and I know there's a lot of people out there that say the husband should always do the finances, but when you're gone 3 or 4 months a year, you know, your wife has to just pick up the house and do it. And so she's been great with the finances. It would probably make me crazy. I could handle the $19 million budget. That didn't bother me, but to try to balance a checkbook would make me crazy.
Yeah.
But she was very diligent in keeping the bills down low, and um, fortunately, we were able to redo the house, and that helped bring things into some semblance of sanity for us. And then, like I said, in August, I picked up a position back on the helicopter, and then September I started in at the school, so that made up for the other 25 or 30%
Yeah.
that we were missing. So, but God took
Yeah.
care of us.
If if the listeners are putting this all together right now, you go through this firestorm, and you go through these incredible circumstances with that brush fire that you survived, and then years later, when you're asked to let go, you actually went through a financial storm. Because I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know many families on the planet that could overnight lose basically 50% of their income, is what you're describing, and not go bankrupt and basically, have to sell or lose everything. You guys must be very, very careful. Your wife must be incredibly efficient and very frugal with your income. If you can keep making the ends meet, keep paying the bills, losing 50% of your income overnight. I don't know how many people on the planet could handle could make that kind of financial loss and still pay the bills.
Yeah, again, it was just a God thing, and um, truly we've had a little bit more trouble here because um, we had to start over again on another house
Yeah,
payment,
yeah, and
and
that's
getting
a
here, I
yeah,
had no job.
sure,
I've got a little part-time church job now, but there's no income from the college coming in. There's no income
yeah.
from the helicopter company coming in. So that's been a bit more of a financial struggle, but God has always provided. He has never let us down. We're very well off. I can't complain about it. It's
Wow,
he's
that's a great
blessed us
attitude, Mike.
abundantly.
Yeah.
With that. So
That
and
is an unbeatable attitude where I've gone through some incredible hardships and at home as a child, and I didn't let it beat me. I went through incredible, physical and, you know, emotional, psychological hardships on the fire department, and I didn't let it beat me. And then I went through some incredible financial hardships, and we're not going to let this beat us. We're going to keep facing it, and we're going to, handle whatever challenges come next. There's a little bit in your story, in every part of your story, that we can all learn from, Mike. And man, I want to thank you for sharing it with us on this episode. There's some people that were listening and they're saying, man, I'd like to get to know more about Mike, or I'd like to learn more about him. If people wanted to know more about you, or if they just wanted to get connected to you, is there a way that they can do that?
um, you can reach me at Montgomery Baptist Association in Alabama.
That's
Um,
Montgomery, Alabama. They can do a Google search for the Montgomery Baptist Association in Montgomery,
right.
Alabama.
Yeah, it's mgm.org,
Okay.
and you'll see me on staff there. And I don't have a web page or anything.
Of
I
course.
do have
That's
a
all right.
Facebook page, but I'm not a big
Yeah.
Facebooker. I get on it maybe every 3 to 4 weeks, but
All right.
mostly just to watch the kids what they're
Yeah.
doing. But
Well, that URL that you just gave, that website that you just gave, we're going to put a link to that in the notes. So if you're driving right now and you just heard that, but you don't have a chance to turn or to pull over to the side and write it down, no
yeah,
worries. We'll put that link in the notes. If people want to find more about you or
yeah,
reach out to you, they can do
yeah.
it at that website.
It's mgmbaptist.org,
Okay.
plural Baptists.
Yeah.
So,
Got it.
mm-hmm.
Well,
But,
again, Mike, man, thank you for being on this episode. Thanks for sharing the storms, plural, of life, that firestorm, the financial storm, even the family storm. Do you like how I just do that with the words that start with the letter F? All of those storms that you've went through. And man, I'm proud to see how you're handling it, your attitude, and the fact that you're facing it and you're going to remain unbeatable. So thanks for sharing with us today, man.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And, looking forward to coming out to your church one of these Sundays and visiting and, get to meet you once again. So
yeah, we're not that far away. So who knows? Maybe we'll get a chance to see each other face to face sometime.
Yeah, we can do that and go to Sappho's afterwards or something.
All right. Thanks, Mike. We'll see you around.
Okay, take care, Jeff.
Yep. And there's something from Mike's story that all of us can learn from. Maybe you've gone through some family storms like Mike. Maybe you've gone through some financial storms like Mike. Maybe you're going through a firestorm in another area of your life right now. I hope that you learned from Mike's attitude, Mike's determination, Mike's commitment that no matter what happens to him, he is not going to quit. That's why the Unbeatable podcast exists. So I hope you were excited and you were fired up by this interview just like I was. I want to thank you for joining me as always. Many of you may have found this episode for the very first time. Maybe you don't even know who this podcast is and what we're all about. If you like this episode, there are a ton more guests just like Mike. In fact, he referenced one or two of them in this interview. And there are a lot more like Mike coming up. So why don't you go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll deliver the next amazing guest right to your phone or to your device every week without fail. I also want to just invite you to get connected with us through the Unbeatable Army, our online email address, and it's totally free. If you want to join, we send you content all week long about our guests, but we also send you more content about what's happening with the greater Unbeatable family. So if you want to become part of the Unbeatable Army, simply go over to unbeatablearmy.com. There are some storms in life that you just need a little bit of advice. You just need a little bit of motivation. You need a little bit of strength to go through. And I've created this little PDF, this free download called the Unbeatable Army Survival Guide. I'll give that to you totally free if you just sign up at unbeatablearmy.com. By the way, you can also find us on social media if you just search for @Unbeatable Podcast. We're pretty much on all the social media platforms. You're going to find some pretty amazing people out there. And our fan of the week for this week is Preston Cravey III. Preston, thank you for being connected. Thank you for being so engaged on social media. Preston, we think you're awesome. That's why you're the fan of the week this week. Once again, thanks for joining me on this episode. I hope you heard something that's going to get you through a storm this week. See you next time.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.